All right. So I have the pleasure of introducing to you Joan Rosenhauer. She is an important woman. She is in charge of the Catholic Relief Services for the whole of the United States. And before she came into this role, she worked for 16 years in the Justice and Peace Office for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And I think that's where you are at right now, right? You're at the USCCB right now?
No, I'm at the Archdiocese of Washington, the Pastoral Center of the Archdiocese of Washington.
Yeah, that's what I said. I appreciate that. So she is quite busy not only supporting with the domestic programs and advocacy in the United States, but also travels across the world and supports people in communication, media, and social media. And in the United States in the 5 regional offices, but also goes abroad and supports the work there in agriculture, food security, health, microfinancing, peace building, and other programs. She has very extensive experience in this, and we're very excited to have her join us. Thank you. Welcome.
Well, it's great to be with you virtually. I think this is so appropriate that, when I was invited to do this, it was explained to me as a way to reduce the carbon footprint of this meeting. And so rather than fly everybody in, you're bringing us in digitally, which is great. So I want to look at this chapter 6 of Laudato Si, and particularly look at it from the perspective not only of what it has to say to us as individuals, but also what it has to say to us in various roles and ministries. And I got a little taste from Marcia of the various roles that you have in parishes and other service agencies and in colleges and various places. So in some ways, the first thing that I have to say, and let me see if I can get this to work, may sound a little arrogant because when I looked at the title for this chapter and then, reread it, what went through my mind is that I think the Holy Father got the title for the chapter wrong. And I say that because when you read what he says in the chapter and what we just heard in the presentation that preceded this, it is not just about ecological education and spirituality. It is also about, and he talks about the habits and the steps that we all have to take in light of our spirituality and in light of the education. So what I want to try to address is that whole picture that he addresses in the content, which is spirituality, ecological education, and action. And I think at the heart of understanding Laudato Si and what the Holy Father is really saying to us is and even how it plays into our spirituality and our education and our action is this understanding of the centrality of 3 key ideas that are going to sound very familiar to you, that we are called to love God, that we are called to love our neighbor, and that we're called to love all of creation, and that those 3 things encompass almost every aspect of our lives and cannot be separated. That if we understand one, we must understand the connection to the others, and that we are called to reflect this understanding and this love of God and love of neighbor and love of all creation in our lives. And of course, you can't read Laudato Si without having a very clear message about what love of neighbor includes, and that is a very particular focus on the poor. And of course, we all know that that's a particular part of our tradition in the church as a part of Catholic social teaching. So in some ways, there's a great deal of simplicity about what the Holy Father is trying to say to us, that we just must understand that loving God means loving our neighbor, means loving all of creation, and that has to infuse everything in our lives. But on the other hand, in some ways, what he is sharing with us and what we have to learn and understand and reflect on is complicated. And I think in some ways that complication, that complexity, is part of the richness of the encyclical. So I particularly wanted to pull out this quote: "When we fail to acknowledge as part of reality the worth of a poor person, a human embryo, a person with disabilities, to offer just a few examples, it becomes difficult to hear the cry of nature itself. Everything is connected." So that message that everything is connected and all the different dimensions of our lives have a role to play in how we think about living love of neighbor and love of creation is really at the heart of this encyclical, and therefore at the heart of how we understand its relationship to spirituality and to education and to action. And as you know, I'm sure from reading it and from studying other chapters and things, that complexity gets far more detailed than even what this quote would suggest. So he, talks about finance and politics and business and science and all of these areas of our lives. And some people criticize him for doing that, that he's kind of bitten off more than he could chew. But I actually think that that is the richness of this encyclical, because he doesn't suggest that he has definitive answers on all those areas. But he does remind us in a powerful way that we have to be aware of how all those different dimensions, and I just named a few of them, of our lives must be shaped by our understanding of loving God, loving neighbor, and loving creation. So I'd like to start by thinking a little bit about this question of spirituality and what it means in our lives. And honestly, I do this with a little hesitancy, because I think that I'm speaking to people who are far better to share with me your wisdom about spirituality rather than the other way around. But I will just share a few reflections for what they're worth, and maybe we can have some conversation at the end about this, and have you share your thoughts about how our spirituality nurtures our understanding of what the Holy Father is saying, and are incorporating it into our lives and living it in our lives. So I guess when we think about our spirituality and how we practice spirituality, how we nurture our spirituality, we have to start with reflecting on our prayer lives. And there again, I think what the Holy Father is saying to us is that our prayer lives have to incorporate a commitment not just to deepening our relationship with God, but understanding how the ways that we deepen our relationship with God through prayer inevitably deepen our relationship with each other and with all of creation, and that has to be woven into our personal prayer lives, but also our communal spiritual activities and experiences and things. So in a particular way, I am drawn to the idea of the Eucharist, and I actually have found some very interesting documents on the connection between the Eucharist and care for creation. And so I would recommend that you Google that, because there are some wonderful documents, one of them by Cardinal Turkson, who is the president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, in a presentation that I think he physically wasn't there, but he offered to and was read by someone else at the 51st Eucharistic Congress in Cebu, Philippines, last January. And what he lifts up is the idea that God's presence in creation is amplified through his presence in the Eucharist. So we can't experience God's presence in the Eucharist without understanding that it is a reflection of his presence throughout creation. And that inevitably leads us to a profound awe of creation and a profound commitment to stewardship of creation. He lifts up things like how our relationship with God is realized in such a profound way through the Eucharist, and that leads us to our relationship and to recommitting to our relationship to all people and all of creation. So I think for all of us, as we participate in the Eucharist, and for those of you who celebrate the Eucharist, to really think about how those Eucharistic celebrations, how that experience reinforces our understanding of that interconnectedness of God, neighbor, and creation, and how that then calls us every experience that we have of receiving the Eucharist, it calls us to live our lives differently, to understand who we are and what we believe differently, and live our lives differently. I also think that our spiritual practices can help us with a particular dimension of caring for creation, of climate change, the challenging issues threatening the environment that the Holy Father lifts up in his encyclical. And that dimension has to do with people's sense that it is just all overwhelming, that the kind of the depth and breadth of the impact on the environment that human beings have already had, the challenge of trying to address our impact on climate change, that all of that is so overwhelming. And what can my little bits of contribution do? What difference does it make if I turn off my lights in that larger scheme of things? And I think our spiritual lives can really play an important role in nurturing and leading us to action and overcoming that sense of being overwhelmed. I often lift up because when I'm not talking about caring for creation, I'm talking about caring for people who are suffering poverty and injustice and violence. And that can be a little on the overwhelming side as well. And I like to lift up as one example of how our spiritual practices can help us overcome that sense of being overwhelmed. This is a picture of the Station of the Cross, Veronica wiping the face of Jesus. I think it's a beautiful rendering of that, but that's what that is. And just that example of how a simple gesture of kindness and love, a simple effort that did not change the overall picture of what was going on at that moment. It did not stop the crucifixion of Christ. Of course, it couldn't. But it has had an impact. I mean, we are still reflecting on that gesture and reflecting on what it can mean for us. And it's just an example of how the Holy Spirit works through the church and through all of us, and even through Veronica in that moment, in a way that we don't always understand, but can have a major impact. And so at one level, I think part of what this message of spirituality and its importance as a way of nurturing our response to creation and God and neighbor, I think an important dimension of the role of spirituality in that is helping us trust God, helping us trust the Holy Spirit, and know that we can do some small things and we can play our role, and that matters because God is really in charge and the Holy Spirit is working through us, and we may not understand everything that our little bit contributes to, but we need to do our part as a part of God's plan. I think of the quote from Sister Thea Bowman that is one of the ones that I just love, when she said, and I want to get it right here, if each one could light a candle, we'd have a tremendous light. And she talks about her own comfort with doing her little piece. And I think that's part of what our spirituality and our spiritual practices can do for us when it comes to caring for creation. So they reinforce God's presence in our lives and in the world, and renew in us a reverence for all of creation as a result of our spiritual practices. They reinforce our relationship and our love for God and our relationship with God, and therefore our relationship with our neighbor and with all of creation, especially the poor among our neighbors. And they reinforce that hope and trust in the Holy Spirit, remembering that God is in charge, but that we can do our part, and that's important whether we see the big impact that may not be so visible to us, but we're a part of God's plan, and we need to do our part. And I think for me, that is what the Holy Father's message about ecological conversion means, that I really have to reflect on how my spirituality, my relationship with God leads to all of that. But I want to also then move, and I do hope that you'll share your thoughts and we'll have some conversation about that. But I want to move to the idea of ecological education. And I think that there are several dimensions of ecological education that are very important to be aware of and keep in mind. And the first part of what ecological education, I think, has to do with understanding the facts. It's one of the pieces of forming our consciences in order to make decisions is gathering the facts and the information. And in some ways, we're in a climate where a culture of really being open to understanding all of the facts is not dominant. That sometimes people don't want to hear all the facts; they want to hear opinions that agree with them. So I think all of us in our own lives need to challenge ourselves to learn about the facts, and then we, to the extent that we're in leadership roles, to make sure that we're encouraging that openness to understand as many different points of view, and especially the facts. And in this case, that has to do a lot with science. So I looked up this little booklet called A Catholic Perspective on Climate Change by John Cole and Frank Incropera, who provide information about the science behind climate change and then put it in the context of just a very brief summary. It's also very short and very accessible. So depending on who you're working with, it might be something that could be helpful. And it does, in a very clear and not overly detailed way, lay out the basic science, which suggests that there is plenty of evidence from plenty of sources. And this is what the Holy Father says, that temperatures are rising. And so we need to be aware of that and accept the evidence that is significant. And again, the Holy Father says that the evidence is compelling. The evidence is convincing. Again, another piece of the evidence to learn about, which is the level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and the evidence very clearly suggests that has gone up dramatically. And then for people to just understand a simple way to explain what difference that makes. And again, this little booklet gives us a nice explanation of how increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere does not allow the long wave radiation to escape in the way that it does when there's less carbon dioxide, and that is what keeps the heat in. It does allow shortwave solar radiation, which is the light, that's visible light, but it does not allow the long wave heat radiation to escape the atmosphere, and therefore we have rising temperatures, global climate change. So in addition to learning about the science, I think ecological education has to include learning about what our Catholic tradition tells us. And I always like to lift up this statement because this is a part of a papal statement. How can we separate or even set at odds the protection of the environment and the protection of human life, including the life of the unborn? And I lift that out because nobody is confused about the Church's position on protecting the lives of the unborn. But this message directly links those two as part and parcel of the same conviction about the value of God's creation, and so I think it's a powerful way to say that caring for creation and protecting the environment is a very central part of our tradition. It's not something that we get to after the important things are handled. It is an important thing. And what I also like to lift up is that this is, in fact, not Pope Francis who has said so much about these kinds of issues, but it's Pope Emeritus Benedict who said that. And you may know that he was known as the Green Pope. So I think it's important for us to not only help people that we work with understand what the Catholic tradition says about this, but also to understand that what the Catholic tradition says about it and what Laudato Si says about it is not a new idea. It has been a part of our tradition. And so not only has Pope Emeritus Benedict spoken very clearly on it, but also this statement, I should like to address directly my brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church in order to remind them of their serious obligation to care for all of creation. The commitment of believers to a healthy environment for everyone stems directly from their belief in God the Creator. That's a very powerful message for Catholics. And again, this idea that it's not a new idea, because this was from Pope St. John Paul II. So again, raising this because I think when we, in some ways, I'm thinking, as I said from the beginning, not only about what this means for each of us individually, but what it means for people in ministry. And I think it's important to help the people we serve understand what our tradition says about this. And part of the reason that this idea that it's not a new idea is important. Just give you one example. After I have the great gift of working with many seminaries and across the United States and many seminarians, and that is a wonderful experience that gives me great hope. But every once in a while, you hear something interesting. And I heard one seminarian reflecting on Pope Francis's commitment to the poor and commitment to creation, and saying and call for a simple life, living a much more simple life, which is very much tied to the message of Laudato Si. And the seminarian said, he is pretty old. If we just wait him out, we'll get back to normal. And I hope that stunned you as much as it stunned me when I heard it. But I think that lifts up the idea that we have to suggest that normal is caring about the environment and caring about the poor, and the intersection of that in our lives. So let me share with you a resource that I hope will be helpful in some settings that you're in, to share, as a part of ecological education, to share the Catholic tradition on caring for creation. And what I'd like to do is ask Marcia to show the video. This was something we developed, CRS and the USACD Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development, for people like all of us to use when we want to share this tradition. Oh, I think I'm supposed to hit up. There we go. Give it one more try. I don't know if this is working. Marcia, did you get?
So here's a little thought experiment. Imagine
Yeah, we're trying to figure out how to get the sound plugged in.
that I spent a lot of time making a gift for you, or spend a lot of time shopping for it, and I wrapped it up and gave it to you with a great deal of intention, and then you ended up.
Its sound is working, we're just waiting for it to buffer. As is the internet.
Yeah, if it looks like it's not going to work, I was thinking we sent it to you on a flash drive.
So
did that not happen?
Experiment. Imagine that I spent a lot of time making a gift for you, or spent a lot of time shopping.
This will take way too long.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go ahead and show it to everybody.
I wrapped it up and gave it to you with a.
There we go.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're gonna. Yeah, we're gonna show it at the end because it's taking a long time to buffer.
Okay, fine. And I apologize for that. It's kind of makes me feel at home in a Catholic setting because the technology didn't work exactly the way we wanted it to. So thank you for that. So this idea of ecological education, it includes understanding the science, the facts. It includes understanding how our church teaches, what our church teaches about the ecology, environment, climate change, all of these issues. What Laudato Si is, lifts up as the latest version of that. It also includes understanding how these issues of environmental degradation are impacting people already. If we don't understand how our brothers and sisters are already being impacted, then we will be missing a very important part of the urgency and the implications of this reality of environmental degradation and climate change for us and for people around the world. So I think one of the reasons that I was asked to participate here was to share some of the examples, because at Catholic Relief Services, we work in more than 100 countries around the world with the poorest of the poor, and we see the impact of climate change and environmental degradation every day. It's not something that we have to anticipate the impact of and therefore try to head off. It is already impacting people, and all of us need to be aware of that as a part of our education about this issue and these concerns. So let me just share with you a little bit about what we're seeing already every day. And one of the things is that there is very much evidence of more frequent and severe storms that are hitting areas of the world where people are least prepared to deal with it. And a clear example of that is Typhoon Haiyan, which you may recall occurred in the Philippines, in the central Philippines several years ago. 6,300 people were killed, 4 million people were displaced. And this is a part of the Philippines that historically did not get these kinds of storms. They tended in the past to track northward, but now they're going through this area where people are just completely unprepared. They don't know how to react, and they don't know how to reduce their risk and increase their resilience. But the good news is that we can help them do that, and we have to help them do that. They didn't contribute to the problem of changing weather patterns and climate change nearly as much as we did here in the United States, and yet they're paying a price that we are not paying, because we can rebound from floods. We can prepare for floods and things like that. It's not that it's not happening. Here we see it in Texas, and we see storms in Louisiana and things. But around the world, there are people who are completely devastated by these experiences because they do not have the capacity to respond. So let me just give you an example of a woman I met in the Philippines, in Tacloban in the Philippines. Her name is Rosa. And after Typhoon Haiyan, in order to have a place to live, her home was destroyed. She was living in a pigsty. That building that you're looking at there was built for pigs. And at the point that I met her, Rosa was living there with her 2 adult siblings that she had to care for, because her mother was killed or died after contracting diseases from the contaminated community escape plan and making sure that everybody is educated about it and making sure they have their run packs and they have their portable stoves. Another example, although what you see here is an example of a thatched roof, but many of the homes in this area have corrugated metal roofs. And you can imagine that when that blows away in the middle of a storm, the damage that it causes when you've got these metal roofs blowing all over the place. And all it takes is some training in how to tie down your roof, and it makes a huge difference. So I'm just giving you examples of ways that with some support, and in many of these communities, it's the Catholic community, it's religious communities, and the local church, and the U.S. Church through Catholic Relief Services, who are helping people overcome the impacts of climate change that they did not cause. Let me just give you another example, which has to do with farmers, and this is in Central America. And two examples. We did a study of farmers who are growing beans and corn in Central America. And what that study showed was that by the mid-2020s, 1 million farmers who currently grow beans and corn in Central America will not be able to grow their crops because the temperatures in that region are projected to rise such that their crops will no longer be viable on the land that they own. And these are people who are smallholder farmers, often subsistence farmers. They don't know anything else. They are farming the way their fathers farmed and their grandfathers farmed, and they don't know, other farming techniques, and they've never grown other crops. They need help just being educated to learn how to use alternative techniques and how to grow alternative crops. This photo here is an example of a farmer in Nicaragua whose crop was devastated by coffee leaf rust, which is a disease of coffee plants. And the reason is that it has become so devastating is that with rising temperatures, the coffee plants are distressed and they're more susceptible to the disease. So this woman's name is Mercedes, and she and her family are coffee farmers, and they lost about 70% of their crop over the last 2 years, and they don't have enough of a buffer to be able to survive after that. But what we are doing, in addition to helping them get through that devastation, is to help them develop a plan. So they're learning alternative crops that they can grow. They have a plan for every year for the next 5 years. You see her holding her 5-year plan, how they're going to rotate crops to ensure that the soil is preserved, and that also helps with water system management, so that you don't destroy the soil and then have the soil wash away, and then you have an even bigger problem with the water availability there. So she's got this wonderful little 5-year plan, and she knows how she's going to turn her life back around after losing her coffee crop, and send her kids to school all the way through high school. That's her goal. And I remember, when I met her, thinking to myself, I need a little 5-year plan like that. Maybe it's not growing crops, but I could use a 5-year plan. She was pretty impressive and very proud of that plan. But it gives you an example of how real people like Mercedes are being impacted by climate change now, and they need our help. The people who, as a nation, really created this problem in a more significant way. We need to step up and help them. And this is just an example of another thing that can be done. This wasn't Mercedes land, but you can see shade coffee growing is a way to deal with rising temperatures, but then it also has the added benefit of encouraging people to maintain stands of trees and also plant trees, and that has the effect of sequestering carbon. So it's kind of a win-win-win all around, and it's just a matter of teaching people these techniques, and they need help with that. And then I just want to talk for a moment about drought. You've probably heard that there are very severe droughts as a result of the worst El Nino in many years, if maybe ever. There's serious droughts in East Africa and other parts of the world. And one of the things that we do is we help families to build these keyhole gardens, because it concentrates the water. And if they have several keyhole gardens and they keep them growing constantly throughout the year, month in, month out, they can feed their family year-round, even with very limited water supply, because it does concentrate the water so much. But just to give you one other example, this is Ethiopia, where much of the drought that is happening now. And you can see how almost impossible it would be to grow anything to feed your family on land that looks like that. What we're doing, one of the things we're doing is to help communities terrace their hillsides so that instead of having the water wash away when it rains and just completely wash downstream, it soaks into the level areas. And as a result, natural springs that didn't exist before are renewed, and we can help people pipe that water into their village. And the land goes from looking like this to this. And you can see how much easier it would be to support a family under those conditions. So again, an example of how people are experiencing the impacts of changing weather patterns and climate change. And there are ways that we can help them, but we have to step up and do that. And that is part of what we have to learn about and reflect. And I think, these people, and I'll just give you one other example. This little girl who's looking at the camera is Haya. She lives in that village that I just was showing you pictures of in Ethiopia. And prior to this water project, she spent 8 hours a day fetching water. She spent 4 hours walking to the nearest water source and 4 hours back. She had never gone to school. You can see now she's in school, and she is in there with a lot of little boys, but couldn't be prouder that she's learning basic arithmetic and reading and writing. And that's going to transform her economic prospects for the rest of her life. And I say all this that, kind of circling back to the idea that when we think about ecological education, we need to learn about the science. We need to learn about the teaching of the church, but we also need to learn about the real people who are already being impacted, and make sure that how we react as a result of learning all that it reflects an understanding of their lives, that they're a part of that calculation of that. The next part of this chapter, which isn't explicit in the title, but it is a part of the chapter very clearly, which is, what does it mean for how we live our lives? What are the steps that we take? And I also want to circle back this idea of being aware of people who are already suffering the impacts of environmental degradation and climate change, because I think that also has to be a part of our spiritual practices, that our neighbor has to have a face. We have to keep real people in mind when we're reflecting on how our relationship with God leads us to understand a relationship with our neighbors, especially those in greatest need, and then for all of creation. Okay, I want to go to action, and I know I need to finish up soon, so if we have some questions or discussion, we can do that, and you can still have enough time to get to Mass. And so I want to just lift up some resources that can help you think about how you can act in your life and in your ministry. So one resource I want to lift up is the Catholic Climate Covenant. Maybe you're all aware of the Catholic Climate Covenant, but it has a wonderful website with many different types of resources that can help us look at both our institutions, and I hope you can see that clearly enough, our institutions and our personal lives, and how we can act in light of our spirituality and our education that then leads us to live our faith in new ways. And so if you can't see there are homily helps there. There are a variety of creation care resources. There are Laudato Si resources, prayer and worship resources. There are resources that help us understand how we can reduce our carbon footprint. There are videos and there are webinars and various things. So I would highly recommend, and you can see here is just a particular image of their how you can get into their suggestions for how we can all reduce our carbon footprint, which is clearly an important part of this process and an important part of how we think about our own action, our own habits, and changing habits that the Holy Father talks about in chapter 6 of Laudato Si. So I would lift the Catholic Climate Covenant up as a great resource. Another resource that I want to let you know about that I just saw is a resource that was developed by the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and it is in English and Spanish, if that would be helpful to you. And I'm just going to, you see it there. I'm sure you can contact the Archdiocese of Atlanta and ask about getting a copy of this booklet. But I'm going to read the topics in it, because I think they are very practical and helpful ways for us to think about how we can act and change our habits and things. So one chapter talks about parish activities and education. One chapter talks about energy conservation and efficiency for parishes and for homes. Another chapter talks about purchasing and recycling for parishes and for parishioners. Another talks about transportation for parishes and parishioners. I'm sure other institutions as well. Anywhere they talk about parishes, I'm sure other institutions, the suggestions would apply. Water conservation, again, for parishes and parishioners, buying and sharing food, creating sustainable landscapes for our homes and our church spaces, our buildings and things, assisting climate vulnerable populations, and making Laudato Si come alive for young people, for parishes and for families. And then finally, political action for parishes and families and parishioners. So those topics, I think, I can't go through all of them, but this is a great resource that I think can be helpful in a lot of different settings for each of us individually and for people in ministry who want to bring this into your ministry. The one flaw that I see in this document, and that is not so much the case for the Catholic Climate Covenant, but for this document, is that it's very focused on local activities. And at a minimum, the focus is all on the U.S. And of course, coming from Catholic Relief Services and knowing the stories and the people that I just shared with you, I hope that you will seriously consider incorporating into how you bring this into your lives and your ministries, concern and reflection on people who are suffering around the world as a result of degradation of the environment. So I do want to lift up our own at Catholic Relief Services, the resources that we have, and you see the URL up there. We have, as you can see, prayers related to this topic, lesson plans and activities for people of all ages, and also photos and videos, and hopefully you'll see a video at some point, one of them, but there are a wide range of videos that tell the story of the church's teaching and of the people who are already being affected, and how we can all respond. We have a whole set of stories that we're producing, 2 stories a month. And so if you keep coming back twice a month, you'll see a new story of one of our brothers and sisters who is struggling with the impacts of climate change, but also the element of hope. How are they able to adapt, and what can we do to help? And then we also have a Catholics Confront Global Poverty, which is a joint project with the USECB, Justice, Peace, and Human Development. But one of the key focuses is advocacy on climate change. So you can sign up for this, you can get the action alerts. And one of the key issues that I was so looking forward to telling you about today, which is the Green Climate Fund, which is an international fund that will help people around the world adapt, and especially the most vulnerable people around the world, adapt to the impact of climate change and also mitigate their own impact on climate change, and it will support them in doing that. That the U.S. contribution to the Green Climate Fund was supposed to be a part of the House State and Foreign Ops Subcommittee and the Senate State and Foreign Ops Subcommittee of the Senate and House Appropriations Committee. That was supposed to be happening today. But as you probably have heard, the House shut down and they all left, or at least some of them left. The Republicans left and the Democrats did a sit-in. So we don't know when the Green Climate Fund appropriation is coming up, but I hope you will sign up and help weigh in support of that, because as I hope I've demonstrated, there are brothers and sisters around the world who need our help to adapt to climate change, and they aren't the ones who primarily created it. And because we have contributed to that, it's our obligation to provide that support. I just want to lift up one other thing about the people in the Philippines, just to give you a sense, because it's not just them adapting to what is happening, but they're also trying to play their part. And I was talking to this group of community leaders in Tacloban in the Philippines, and one of the things they said is that they had recently more and more in their community been getting motorized bicycles. And I'm not talking about motorcycles, I'm talking about bicycles with little motors, little mini motors on them that just make it a little bit easier to get around long distances on a bicycle. And what they said was they are thinking about, and they're talking about, getting rid of their motorized bicycles as a way to reduce their carbon footprint. And I was so humbled by that, because if they can be struggling with what can we do and making their contribution to reducing the carbon footprint, surely we can struggle with what we can do and also help them in that process. So that's the Green Climate Fund and advocacy on international issues, and I hope you'll join in on that. And then I also just want to lift up, we have an initiative for college students, which is called I Am Climate Change, I Am the Cause, I Am the Solution. And there are all kinds of resources for college students, but young adults in general. So if you are working with young adults and you'd like to see if they're interested in getting involved in these kinds of issues, there are lots of resources you can use on that. So let me just bring my comments to a close, and then if there are questions or suggestions and comments you'd like to make, I would love to hear them. And I lift this up because this is back to the village in Ethiopia where we had that water project, and it reminds us, in some ways, Thea Bowman's statement about our little light can make more of a difference and be part of making more of a difference. So when we help those villages get water projects like that and respond to the droughts and survive the droughts, it makes a real difference. One of my colleagues asked these women, can you tell me what difference, we have a group of people there, we want to learn about what impact is this happening? How is it making a difference in your life that you have this water project? And the first answer we got from one of those women was, none of my children died this year. So we should never underestimate what our prayer and learning and acting can mean in our world and for our brothers and sisters as a result of how we live our faith. And so that always inspires me to keep trying to figure out what I can do, and I hope it inspires you some too. Thank you, and I welcome your comments and questions.
This is just a suggestion. I work in 2 parishes in Pasadena, California. We take up, as in all parishes, the annual collection for CRS. We did it just a few weeks ago. If I had had some of this information, it would have been made that annual collection so much more vital, I think, and important, and show the marvelous effect that our faith through the CRS is having on the world. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I couldn't hear all of that, and so if Marcia, I don't know if you can type in just a little bit the short version of it, but I think you said that this information could be useful in some settings, and so I hope that's the case. Okay, so I see Steve Harrow is asking, how can one acquire the pamphlet, A Catholic Perspective on Climate Change? We either have on that CRS climate change page already, or very soon we'll have a link to it and you can download it. So just if it's not there now, I haven't looked today, and it's one of those things we're just putting it up and things, but I think it should be there already.
I don't know if this is relevant to the ecology theme, but in these days we're celebrating, or not, I should say, remembering the 65 million people who are refugees, exiles in the world, fleeing violence, especially in the Mideast. I imagine CRS has programs for that. I don't know if you could give us a brief summary of what you're doing for people in Lebanon and Jordan and Syria and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. We have a wide range of programs in the entire region in the Middle East, but also in the transit countries, in the Balkans, so in Macedonia and Albania, we're supporting Caritas Greece, where so many people are coming. And what I can tell you is, I'll just give you a couple of examples. I don't have all the data in front of me. I didn't have that ready, but I have visited the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and you may know that more than the equivalent of a quarter of the population of Lebanon has come in from Syria into Lebanon as refugees. And in the Bekaa Valley, there are only informal camps. And so I was going out with Caritas Lebanon, which is the local Catholic Charities agency, to visit some of these people who, it's all women and children, almost exclusively women and children. And they are just living with like bits of like a little bit of a tarp or a bit of burlap. I mean, just the resources they have. So they come with almost nothing. and they come across the mountains into the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon from Syria, and then they're just struggling to survive. And the Caritas car rolls up, and everybody comes running out to greet it. And they explained, I'm from the United States. And I said, what would you want people in the United States to hear from you and to know about your situation? And the first thing one of the women said was, I want to thank Caritas. I want to thank the Catholics. Most of these people are Muslims. And she said, the Catholics are the ones who are helping us the most. I mean, that kind of struck me and made me proud as a Catholic and things. And part of the reason for that is that Caritas there and some of the religious communities, and so I don't want to in any way not affirm the role of religious communities as well that we work with, but we will work in places that are not part of the UN system. And a lot of these people don't bring their paperwork with them, and they're afraid to get into the UN. There's all kinds of reasons. And so, some of the other charities, like the Muslim charities, the Red Crescent, things like that, are working in the official system, and these informal camps are not a part of that. Just one other example is the biggest fear and the biggest heartbreak when you visit these refugees is the children, because at least half and maybe well over half of the refugees are children, and these are children who have known nothing but war for more than 5 years. And when they come into the camps, we run child-friendly spaces, and they come into these spaces, and you give them a box of crayons and a piece of paper. Then they take the black and the gray crayons, and they draw people being killed and bombs falling from the sky and dead stick figures on the ground. I mean, it's horrifying to see the little drawings that these little children draw, because that's what their life has been, and they have been so traumatized. I saw a study that suggested that 60%, 40% of the children, the Syrian refugee children, are suffering from full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder, and 60% are suffering from clinical depression. And so the idea that an entire generation of children is so traumatized, what does that mean for their lives, which, we care about? They're all our children, but also for the future of these countries and of the region. And so one of the things we do is we have a puppet therapy, and we have all kinds of programs to help these refugee children try to work through their trauma. And another great story, it's, when you're in this work, you just hear these stories that are, you just can't help but retell them. So one of my colleagues was going into one of these child-friendly spaces, and she, had an interpreter, and came across a little girl about 12 years old who was there. And the little girl described that when she came to the camp with her family, this is in Jordan because there are formal camps in Jordan, and this one was in Jordan. She came to the camp with her family, and all the kids told her to go to the tent that said Catholic Relief Services. And she said, again, most of these folks are Muslims. And she said she walked in, and she saw how all the kids, that was bright and colorful, and kids were playing, and the kids were being helped. And she'd never heard the word Catholic before, but she thought it meant help. And I thought, that's we could do a lot worse than being known as the people that help. So lots of work being done with Syrian refugees, and it's just a really critical. And in Iraq, just to mention refugees, in Iraq, there are a lot of Christians who are being displaced, and the Catholic Church is one of the key places where Iraqi Christians are coming, including the Catholics. And the story of people standing up for their faith, the stories of people standing up for their faith are just kind of humbling and astounding and things. So, yes, lots of work being done with refugees around the world. It's a huge crisis.
Thank you, Joan. We have to leave it there for this afternoon, but thank you very, very much for your input.
Thank you again for having me. Thank you.